Welcome to the Automotive Diagnostic Podcast. We're going to explore ways to sharpen our diagnostic skills, find learning resources, and hear from experts in the automotive field. This episode is brought to you by L1 Automotive Training and Keith Perkins. If you're looking for education on module programming, J2534, EEPROM work, key and immobilizer, electrical diagnostics, or drivability diagnostics, Keith has a website, l1training.com, that's got over 60 hours of training videos on all those subjects and more. When I first started out doing mobile, I utilized Keith's videos on module programming in J2534 in order to get my head wrapped around what I would need for the tooling, the computers, the software setups, what kind of obstacles I would be up against when I'm out there programming modules on cars. And it was a huge benefit to me. And I continue to use the training videos that he has on his website. So I strongly recommend checking out l1training.com. The link is in the show notes. Hey, what's going on, automotive world? Welcome to another episode of the Automotive Diagnostic Podcast. My name is Sean Tipping. I'll be your host once again for this week's episode. Thank you so much for joining me. This week on the show, you've got me. You got another case study. We've got a 2017 F-150 with a 3.5-liter turbo engine that kind of kicked our ass. Definitely a strange one. I don't know if this is going to be a regular problem on one of these. It might be a problem area. I haven't seen it here before, but I'll explain what I'm talking about. The way the symptoms presented themselves, I think, are of the most interest in why I'm talking about this. And I'll walk you through, it wasn't a clear-cut path to victory on this one. We got there, but it was sort of roundabout, and it was sort of almost reaching kind of a dead end in one area and deciding to take another path, and it eventually did get us to the ultimate solution. So anyways, I'll walk you through it. This, again, is the 2017 Ford F-150, and it is a crank no start. That's why we were called out to look at it. Shop said, hey, cranks doesn't start. All right, cool, easy enough, straightforward, right? Go out there, check, what are we missing? Air, fuel, spark, right? The basics. There's lots of timing issues with these things, and there's a number of other issues. We see some wires that get corroded in the harness underneath the battery tray that actually ends up running in front of the engine. And there's several wires that will break in there just from corrosion buildup on a regular basis. You'll lose power to ignition coils and stuff like that. But anyways, Steve was the first one that went out there to check it out, actually. And when he got out there, it was a completely dead battery, stone dead. Now, this isn't unique. We see this a lot in vehicles that we go out to look at, especially something that's crank no start. Shop may have been trying to crank on it for quite a while, but did know battery's dead. So we get a jump pack on there, and it is a crank no start. And Steve goes through, and of course, we don't have a whole lot of history codes to rely on in this case because of the dead battery. But we do get a code in there that does say it's a P00C6, fuel pressure too low while cranking. Okay, well, maybe we're onto something very simple here. So we don't have fuel pressure. Except for, you can look at the low side and the high side. It's a GDI engine, and they're both reading where you'd expect them to be. The low side was somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 PSI, and the high side, after cranking on it, was up over 500 PSI. Now, okay, maybe one of them's inaccurate. I wouldn't think both of them. And that 60 PSI roughly is where we want the low side. And after cranking it for a while, you'll see 500 plus PSI of fuel pressure. Now, even if the fuel pressure sensor is reading inaccurately, the strange thing was this was a repetitive code that kept setting, but the rail pressure, again, at least according to what we saw on the scan tool, was reading accurately. So Steve called me, we talked about that for a little while, and we weren't really sure exactly what that code was signifying to us, or why the PCM was setting it, we were thinking, well, maybe it's something to do with the fact that the battery is dead. We're using a jump pack. Is something happening while we're attempting to crank it? And that is, the code is too low while cranking. Maybe it's a battery voltage issue. I don't know for sure, but let's get under the hood and we will start doing our basic checks beyond that, right? We'll keep this in mind, but we'll start looking at what else do we have or not have in order to start the engine. Again, it's an air fuel spark thing, and we're just going to go step by step through our normal process and see if we can find what the solution is. Steve did note, while we were going back and forth on this, at one point he got a P2610 that's set in the engine control module, and this is ECM engine off timer performance. Again, we didn't think a whole lot of it, but he did note it, and again, thought, okay, maybe this is due to battery voltage, but it didn't really seem relevant. If you go into the description of that particular code, it just says the DTC sets when the difference between the engine off time and the central processing unit time exceeds a calibrated limit for the calibrated amount of time. And then it's like incorrect or intermittent battery cable connections. Okay, that might be our answer right there. Keep alive power circuit to the PCM concern. Engine stall, rapid ignition cycle, module connections, or network concerns. So anyways, we didn't really think too much of it, but he did note it. Let's go under the hood. Let's start testing our basics and see what we have or don't have. One of the things he found, because it's an easy check, was that we did not have spark. At least on the couple coils that he checked, there was no spark at all. And through a couple more quick checks, found that there was no control to the coils while cranking. Okay, so that means the PCM, for whatever reason, was not triggering these coils, right? They have power, they have ground, and then they receive a signal from the PCM. There's a little driver in each coil to fire to ignite the spark plug. Wasn't happening. Okay, so now that's leading us back to the PCM. We got to look at cam crank stuff. Steve was looking at cam crank on the scan tool for this, and everything was looking okay. And at that point, the engine started and ran, and actually seemed to run pretty good. Wasn't setting any codes at that point. Started a few times, couldn't get it to act up any more than that. And we were kind of out of time on this one anyways, for what we had gotten into it, right? We allowed ourselves an hour for a basic no start. If it turns into more than that, we'll see what the schedule looks like. We might, research, come up with a game plan and come back. But especially if it starts working, well, then we need to make, other plans to have the shop call us back when it's acting up, which is what we told them. We said, hey, start this thing over the course of the next couple of days. Might happen again. If it does, let us know. We also made the recommendation of, hey, make sure you replace this battery, or charge it and test it, but ideally replace it because it looked like it was old. And for us to be effective in our diagnosis of a no start, we want to have a good battery in there. And they agreed, and they said they would do that. And then they'll check it over the next few days. And if it acts up again, they'll call us. Cool, awesome. So we move on. They call us later that day. They put a battery in it, and I think it was not long after that, it went back to not starting. Okay, so hey, can you guys come back out and redo this? Sure. Yeah, we'll come out, check it out, and we'll be maybe a little bit better prepared, at least to have an idea of what we're up against, maybe. Right, we know that we need to look at why it wasn't sparking if it's doing the same thing. So I ended up going back to this one. It was a day or two later, and when I got to it, the new battery that they had installed was also like completely stone dead. There was nothing left in this thing, which I did think was odd. We didn't think that much of it the first time, but when I got to it, brand new battery, I'm like, that is very strange. Like, how much did they crank on this thing in order to try to start it? And I asked them that, and they said not much. We tried it a few times, it didn't start, and we just left it for you at that point. So I was like, that's odd, right? Not stuff like that happens, right? Batteries go dead, but a brand new one, 24 hours or maybe a little bit more, just seems strange. So I kept that in the back of my mind. But here's the thing, even once I had my jump pack on it, it still was a crank, no start. So, okay. A dead battery shouldn't be causing that situation. I also had the P00C6 setting, which was fuel pressure too low during cranking. Now, what I did on this one was when I first got battery power to it, I had my scan tool hooked up, and I looked at high side versus low side, just keying it up, meaning that the low side pump is the electric one's the only one that's running. You don't have your mechanical pump engaging on the high side. Really what I was looking for here, because I know we had a fuel pressure code, was do these the high and the low match when we haven't done anything with the high side, and they should be pretty close. Now I will say, because of the range of pressure that a high side sensor needs to measure, each tenth of a volt is going to be a bigger amount of PSI, if you will. So really, I guess what I'm going with is the low side pressure sensor is going to be more sensitive to small changes in pressure, but you can still look to see if they're close, and they should be, right? Just keying this thing up, I should be able to see that I got pretty close to what is in the low side on the high side of this vehicle if I haven't moved the engine yet. And that's what I saw. And really, I'm just looking for accuracy between sensors, right? Logic between the two sensors. Computers will do this with temperature sensors when you first fire up a vehicle, right? When the vehicle is cold, everything should be the same temperature, pretty close, right? Ambient, transmission, engine, battery, evap, whatever temperature sensors you have in the car, if it's been sitting for several hours, they should all be ambient temperature. And there might be a rationality code if they're off. You can do the same thing with pressure sensors. Like if you got a turbo engine, you've got a barrel, you've got an intake, you got a boost sensor, they should all read the same. Key on engine off, right? And it's just we know that everything is equal at that point, and so we can compare the sensors to each other to see if one of them's skewed or out of range. That's kind of my idea here with the low and the high side, and it looked okay. Now, I did crank it, and I did get this code for low fuel pressure during cranking, but my high side pressure was, I got it all the way up to almost 1,000 PSI just cranking this thing. I think that's maybe 800 some on there, but that's plenty to start the engine. That number one, and it wasn't starting, but also that it set this code was very strange. I didn't quite understand what the deal was there. And I'm going to go check the spark, and I'm going to look at things like cam and crank, obviously while it's not starting, but I am curious because I got this same code. Now here's the other thing. I also got a 2610 engine off timer performance. Now that wasn't a constant code. It didn't happen every time you tried to start this, but it did get that code, which again, thought was, I just noted it. I didn't think that was the reason why this vehicle wasn't starting, but I'm like, oh, that's interesting that code came back. Now, yes, the battery was dead. Maybe that has something to do with it, but I have a fully charged jump pack on this thing. The code didn't set immediately. It's not like I hooked up my battery and had that code. I had been attempting to start it a few times, and then I got that code. And again, one of the things lists rapid key cycles. I didn't think what I was doing was rapid, but maybe it's enough. I don't know all of the details of what will and won't set this particular code or what it means for me, but for you listening, hindsight, it was relevant, I think. And so I'm noting that, hey, it did pop up. And in diagnostics, we have to be careful of discounting or not discounting specific pieces of information, right? There's such a fine balance in what we do of determining what information is important and what's not, because you can go both ways with this. You could take a piece of information and decide that, hey, this is really important. This is the reason I have my problem. I need to follow this. And it's a complete rabbit hole, right? Maybe it's a data PID that you're getting on your scan tool. They're like, oh, this is completely incorrect. This shouldn't be here. This shouldn't be this way. But really, it's just a scan tool thing. Or really, it's just the engineers didn't, have that data interpreted the way that you thought it would. And then you follow it, and you follow it, and you follow it, and you realize, oh, this wasn't a useful piece of information. But then other times you may completely glance over a code or a data PID that you're like, oh, that's not relevant to what I'm doing, right? It's something, but I don't think it has anything to do with why the vehicle won't start. And I'm not saying I have the answer as far as, when to follow something and when not to, but at the very least, keep this stuff in mind. I would say to err on the caution of don't discount things completely unless you know beyond the shadow of a doubt that this really doesn't have anything to do with what I'm dealing with. But boy, there's so many situations where I've said that and then come back and I'm like, oh, that definitely did have something to do with what I'm dealing with. And maybe you can just kind of save it, go through the things that are more obvious, and if those don't get you anywhere, then come back to like, okay, maybe this code does have something. Or here at the very least, can I follow this code and see what's setting it, what's causing this, and then look back and say, does it have anything to do with my main problem, right? I've been in that situation lots, and that's actually kind of how this one turned out. Is I will have maybe multiple things going on with the car, multiple symptoms, multiple modules setting codes, or multiple electrical faults, and I'm trying to get to the source of whatever the customer complaint is, right? Engine doesn't start, module doesn't communicate, whatever it is. And I've got a bunch of different stuff. I'm kind of getting down some dead ends with going down one path. I will pick another path that I'm like, okay, I know I can find the reason why this code is setting, or I know I can find the reason why this circuit isn't working. I'm going to follow that, kind of ignore the rest of the noise, and see where this gets me. And it might get me to the source of everything. And that works. That works really, really well. And I've used that to, again, kind of quiet the noise of what you might have in a complex diagnostic. Anyways, back to the car. I'm trying to get this thing started. I've got some fuel pressure codes that don't quite make sense. I got this engine timer performance code that did set. But I'm going to go under the hood. I'm going to confirm what Steve saw. I had no control to the coils. Same thing. Now, you can have engines where if the timing is off, and that was one of the things we were thinking about on this thing, if the timing's off, it will pulse like number one ignition coil one time. That's it. And it'll stop controlling spark. I've seen that. I did not see that on this engine, though. I didn't have control at any point when I was trying to start this thing, and it didn't pop at all. There was no, indication that it was even attempting to start besides the fact that it's cranking. But no control of the coils. Now, I didn't make it as far as checking the injectors. I decided what I'm going to do on this thing first is I'm going to check cam crank and just see, do I have an issue there? Because that could definitely be causing it to not spark if I'm not getting the proper cam or crank reading. So I do that, hook up the Pico. I'm looking at these, and you can look at some data PIDs on the scan tool too. But in this situation, I really want to see the scope pattern because you can have weird stuff that will completely prevent spark from happening, and you might even still register an RPM on the scan tool. I had obviously this isn't what I was dealing with on this one, but like I had a F-150, I think it was a 5.0. Somebody had wired up the crank sensor wires backwards when they did a wiring repair. And so I think it was even showing RPM, but the missing notch moved in the wrong direction, right? So it would be, instead of a falling edge, it was a rising edge, which isn't what the computer was expecting for the sync notch. And that was causing it to not start, even though it was registering an RPM. So where I'm getting at with this is sometimes looking at the scope waveform of a cam or crank sensor is worth it, and not just relying on the data PIDs, which is my goal here. And I want to see what's the actual pattern, compare them to a known good. I'm kind of thinking timing still in my mind might be a possibility, but let's go with that. Well, of course, once I get to the point of scoping the cam and crank, the engine ends up starting for me on this thing too, which I was definitely bummed about. I'm like, oh man, that sucks. And we're back to the same thing. Like, you can shut it off, start back up, you wait for a while. The thing's starting and running right now, and it's not setting codes like it was before. I didn't get that engine off timer performance code or the low fuel pressure code. And I did look at fuel pressure, and it seemed like it was adequate where it needed to be. The actual and desired didn't quite match at idle. If you revved it up, it seemed to be okay. And I didn't know if that was actually normal for this engine or not. I think it should have been closer than it was. So that was one area I'm just kind of like, well, that doesn't look right, but I'm not setting codes and this thing's actually running. So I'm sitting there looking over the scan data and stuff and thinking about this one, where I can go with this, because this shop is actually a little bit of a haul for us to get to. And so I hate, wasting trips back and forth with intermittent problems. We try to avoid intermittents, but as far as the shop knew, this was not an intermittent problem. Like, it wasn't starting for them. Okay, let's come check it out. But clearly that's what it's doing for us. And it's going to be tough to determine, what was causing that if we can't catch it in the act. But I was thinking about the car, and I was thinking about what I've seen so far. Again, like, how did the fuel pressure code setting tie into this? Is that just a glitch from a dead battery? How did that engine off timer performance code set? Was that just because, jumper cables and dead battery? And then I also was thinking at this point, because of those two specific things, I was like, why was the battery completely dead? And is that something that I need to at least look into? And again, going back to like, hey, can I find the source of this problem that is definite right now in front of my face? And will it maybe lead me to the source of everything? Maybe that's a stretch in this one. But what I did decide to do, I was like, well, let me just check. Let me shut this thing off and just see what the draw is on the battery. And I'm also thinking maybe I can double up here of maybe the amount of time with the engine off will help lead back to a no start situation. And during that time I'm waiting, I can put an amp clamp around the battery cable and just see, like, how much is this thing drawing out of it? Is it just some coincidence that this battery was dead? Did they put a discharged one in there? I haven't even walked inside to ask them these questions yet, but I just want to see what's the draw on this battery while I'm kind of just waiting for this thing to go to sleep. Give it a good 10-15 minutes and then see what happens to it. Now, during that time, and I mean, we're only 5 minutes in, this thing's still drawing 3 amps, right? And Fords notoriously will take, 40 plus minutes to fully go to sleep, but that's when we're talking like a quarter of an amp. That'll stay for 40 minutes on this thing. 3 amps, that should be gone within 5 minutes on just about every car. I probably shouldn't say that. There's probably exceptions to that rule, but you're going to come down to under an amp of current pretty quickly on most cars if you've got them properly to sleep. 3 amps too high, especially after 5 minutes, and it kept persisting. And I'm like, okay, let's pause here. Let's go in and talk to these guys and just ask them. Maybe they need to ask their customer about this draw, about what's going on here. Has this been going on for a long time? Did this coincide with the engine not starting, or do they know anything about it? So I do that. I go inside, tell them like, hey, of course it's starting again. We were on the track, but we kind of lost it once the engine was starting. But I do have a major draw on your battery, and it was stone dead when I got here. What do you know about that? And kind of our fault for maybe not asking the correct questions. And we're using some intake forms now that questions the customer, and they write stuff down. They fill it out online. It's actually pretty slick. They could just go online, answer some questions, email gets sent to Mike, we get the appointment set up, and then the tech has all the notes right there, plus the VIN number and all that stuff, before and when they get to the job. It's pretty slick. But again, maybe we didn't ask the right question here, but anyways, now I have a little bit more information, so now maybe I can ask the right question. And I say, what's the deal with this battery drawing? Like, you guys put in a fresh one that fully charged, yeah, and it did crank just fine when we put it in there, but the customer did mention something about their battery going dead right at the same time that this no start thing started happening. I'm like, okay, all right. Can we ask the customer like any more information they have on this? Also, I'm maybe going to change my approach to this to see if I can solve for a draw, because I know I can, right? I do a ton of parasitic draws, and it's happening right now for sure with the key off, it's drawing 3 amps. I just have to find that. And I had them reach out to the customer while I started looking into it, and they didn't have any other information besides that these things correlated, right? The time at which the no start began was the same time at which the battery like dying overnight began. I'm like, okay, I don't really understand the connection just yet, but there seems to be some correlation. And again, at the very least, I'm there. I know I can solve a draw, right? And maybe we fix the draw and that doesn't solve the no start problem, fine. But we're going to fix a problem, and then maybe we'll get lucky and it has something to do with one another. Okay, cool. So let's go for it. 3 amp draw. What I ended up finding was that a series of fuses had voltage on them that were not supposed to have voltage with the key in the off position. And there were a total of 11 fuses in the underhood fuse block, which is over on the passenger side, that get fed from the ignition relay, which I think is in the BCM under the dash. But this ignition relay is only supposed to be on when the ignition is on, right? This is a key on power that these fuses are supposed to be supplied, power from this particular relay. But they all had voltage on them. Now, when I say voltage, here's the thing that we need to be aware of when we're looking at draws. We're looking at circuits that are staying awake. This was not a full 12 volt battery voltage. And you could determine this by using a meter or scope on these fuses and seeing that it was somewhere around like 7 volts on these circuits. So battery was at 12, at least when I had my jump pack on there. And these circuits, again, that are not supposed to have power unless the key is on from the ignition relay, were at about 7 volts. Now, the other way that, and the way I was doing it, is I had my test light out and I was touching fuses and I was looking at it, and I saw that the test light was not lit as brightly as I would expect it to. Now, I should mention, I'm not walking you through every single step of my parasitic draw diagnosis. I have plenty of case studies on that, so I am kind of skipping parts of it here. I do have a class that I teach on that, so if anybody's interested, let me know. And I have lots of details on parasitic draws. I am skipping some parts of using voltage drop across the fuses, but anyways, I get to the point where I determine that, hey, these fuses are active when they're not supposed to be. This show is brought to you by Automotive Seminars. If you're looking to stay up on the cutting edge diagnostic strategies and techniques, this is the place. You've got live 4-hour seminars that are put online that you can join in, ask questions, interact with the instructors with some of the best of the best. They've got Keith Perkins and John Thornton putting on classes like network diagnostics, mechanical engine testing, advanced electrical testing, and GDI diagnostics, and a ton more. And once you purchase one of these training seminars, you can access this at any time that you want through your account at automotiveseminars.com. You can rewatch the training a year, 2 years later, which makes this training even more valuable. So I highly recommend you check this out. The link is in the show notes. Anyways, I have voltage, but it's not full battery voltage, which likely means it's probably bleeding through or from something onto this shared circuit and causing other things to be awake. And so what I'm going to do is I've narrowed it down to the output for the ignition relay. Okay. And if I actually key the thing up and turn the ignition relay on, it's full power. So I'm not thinking it's the relay, but I have to do some more investigating to figure this out. But if you have a fuse that has power on it when it's not supposed to, even if it's a less than battery voltage like it is in this case, a lower voltage, what you can do is remove one of the fuses, or the fuse that has the unwanted voltage on it, the voltage when it's not supposed to. And you can check either side of the fuse to see, okay, where is this unwanted voltage coming from? Now, here's what I mean by this. Each fuse in a fuse box is going to receive power on one side, right, from whatever source that is, another fuse or a relay or a bus bar. It's going to be getting 12 volts from a source. And on the other side of that fuse is the output that it goes to, module, relay, solenoid, light bulb, whatever it is. And you can check either side of that fuse to see, okay, where is this coming from? Is it the feed side or is it the output side? How do you know which side it is? Well, you could turn the key on and, you could look for the 12 volts and you could say, like, pull the fuse out. One is going to have 12 volts. One should have nothing on it, most likely in most cases. And if you find one that has, 7 volts on the other side, that's a very strong possibility. The other way you can do this is, in this case, like I said, I had like 11 fuses. Pick one, set it up so you can see your test light, your meter, your scope, whatever you're looking at to measure the voltage, and then start pulling these fuses one by one until it goes away. And then now we can zoom in on that leg. And that's what I did on this one. Because again, I have 11 fuses that share this output from the ignition main relay. And I'm going to pick one of them. I'm going to look at the voltage, it's like 7 volts, and I'm going to start pulling fuses one by one until I see that drop out. And I did. And it was on the ABS fuse. This is fuse 107. It's a 10 amp. And the only thing that it feeds is the ABS module. And it's got a circuit that goes from the underhood fuse block, which is on the passenger side, and it goes out and then under the fan shrouds and then over to the ABS module, which is the left front frame rail. And there are no connectors in between. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. I'm going to go to my ABS module. I'm going to unplug it, and I'm going to see if that voltage goes away, which is what I did. I unplugged the ABS module. My voltage did not go away. So I double checked to make sure, okay, I'm on the right side of the fuse. Yes, it is definitely coming from this wire. It's a green-brown wire that runs between, again, the fuse block and the ABS module. ABS module is disconnected, and I still have voltage on that wire, which means, unless the diagram's wrong, which it wasn't in this case, but that is something you should consider, that we've got a short onto this wire somewhere. We're bleeding voltage onto this wire from an unknown source. Now, something else I noticed that was interesting here, and this is helpful, and I would recommend this if you're looking for circuits that are shorted together. This may or may not always work, but having the vehicle in a state where you can audibly hear changes in things can often be helpful to help clue you into what is shorted to it or what components might be involved with said short. And it's actually going back to one I did years and years ago with a 5-volt reference short, right? We had 2 wires where a ground wire, which was the control for a relay, and then a 5-volt wire were shorted together. And using a test light, I could activate the relay through the 5-volt source. And that might sound a little confusing if you don't have a diagram in front of you, and I get it. But what that proved to me, and this was a number of years back, of how good a test light is for actually activating relays. Because a test light, incandescent one, will flow, depending on the bulb that you have in there, 300 milliamps of current, 200 milliamps of current. That's enough to activate most relays. Well, cool. And I heard the relay clicking, and I was able to clue me into the circuit that I was dealing with. And then I was able to find the short because I'm like, okay, this component's here, this component's here. Oh, here they share this harness. Oh, here's the damage to the wiring. Okay, same thing happened to me on this Ford, although it wasn't a relay. It was the 4x4 integrated wheel solenoid that was clicking. Now, this is a solenoid that changes vacuum to the locking hubs on the front end, and it's over right in front of the brake booster. But when I touched this circuit, now keep in mind the fuse is out for this circuit and the ABS module is disconnected, and I still got like 7 volts on here. And when I touched this with a grounded test light on this wire, I could hear the integrated wheel hub solenoid activate. It went click. And I'm like, that's strange. So how do these circuits, share a path, or where could they be together? So first thing I did was I looked at the diagram just to see what is this 4x4 solenoid connected to. Now the interesting thing is that integrated wheel hub, it gets power at all times. It has power on one side that is hot all the time. And that's key to understanding why this draw is a draw, or why we have power on the wire that we do. But it goes to the solenoid, and then the other side of the solenoid, there's a wire that goes to the transfer case control module that turns the solenoid on and off. Okay, very simple. We got a ground side control driver in the transfer case module. Now the transfer case module is under the right kick panel inside of the vehicle. So kind of far away from this wheel hub solenoid. But our ABS unit, right, that we have the wire that we know is shorted to something, and it seems like it has something to do with this, is over on that driver's side frame rail, which is just maybe 2 feet away from this solenoid, roughly. Okay, so maybe I can follow some harnesses here and see, but I'm also asking myself, okay, well, grounded test light, right? So I clippy end on the ground, and then I am connected to this circuit. I was doing it over by the fuse, and I could do it by the ABS unit too, and that solenoid would click. So what am I doing there? I'm providing ground on the control side of this solenoid. I have to be, right? It's hot all the time on one side. I'm providing ground. Now, this should be a ground circuit, right? There should only be ground here. Why do I have voltage on it? Here's why. That power that is fed to the solenoid, right? Remember, hot at all times to the solenoid on this white-red wire, will go through the solenoid onto this, it's a brown-blue wire, which is the control wire for the solenoid. And when the transfer case module is not controlling the wheel hubs, which it's not when the car is off, that wire is also going to have power, right? We don't have voltage drop unless we have current flow. So we have voltage on that side. Now, what I'm thinking is if we're going back to the circuit that had power, this is other side on the ABS is basically an ignition feed to the ABS. So it has to be shorted to the control wire of this wheel hub. And when everything is off, we're getting power through the solenoid onto the control wire, which then goes onto this wake up circuit, which then goes back and then feeds voltage to all of these fuses, keeps a number of things awake, and equals a 3 amp draw. All right, so let's just find out where it's shorted. Follow the harness. Where would these two things meet? It's right underneath the fan shroud on the driver's side, and I find wires that have been pinched. The insulation had been rubbed away, and there was actually like 3 or 4 of them that had open insulation where the copper wires could rub, and 2 of them were my wires in question. So it wasn't perfect contact, which is why we had some voltage drop. But that was enough to keep a bunch of things awake that were normally fed off of that ignition relay circuit. So I separate those out, and I'm able to get the car to go to sleep at this point. Okay. Then at this point, it continues to start. I don't have any codes. Everything seems to be okay at this point. Obviously, the wiring needs to be fixed. But I talked to the shop, explained hey, I found this draw. There's a few different wires down here that need to be repaired. It was doing this, which was keeping the vehicle awake. Why don't you guys fix these, get this battery charged up, give this thing a couple more days of starting, because for me, it's starting every single time. And we will see, did this have something to do with why the engine was not starting? Now, at this point, I can't prove it. And I told him that. I was like, I cannot prove that this is the problem, but I know this is a problem, and I know this is the fix to said problem, right? That's the whole, let's follow what we know is wrong, fix that, and then see what happens. And I was like, we'll check in with you. You guys call us. If it doesn't start again, we'll come back out. We'll start fresh. We'll go back after this thing, right? I'm really thinking I'm going to go real hard for cam crank immediately. I saved the waveforms that I did have on this thing when it was starting. We can compare to when it's not. But there's a chance that maybe we fix this just by this. Now, why? What could be going on here that could cause this thing to not start properly? And I think personally that the engine off timer performance code that we're getting, the P2610, which if we go back to some of the causes that will set this, is incorrect or intermittent battery cable connections, keep alive power circuit to the PCM concern, rapid ignition cycle or module communications network concerns, that this indicated that there was power getting to the module on a circuit at a point when it was not supposed to have it. No, so here's what I mean. The PCM is meant to get several different power feeds. There's going to be a constant keep alive circuit, right? It's going to have power there, right? B plus all the time. Then there's going to be one or several ignition wake up circuits. Now, one of those ignition wake up circuits on this vehicle comes from a fuse that is fed off of that ignition relay circuit. One of those 11 fuses goes to the PCM, meaning that it was getting power when it was not supposed to when some of the other ignition feeds are shut off. Right, for instance, there is an ECU PCM wake-up circuit, which is a completely separate circuit from the BCM in order to turn this thing on and get it communicating. And so modules in general on cars can have more complex setups as far as the power feeds to them than just a simple power and ground or power and ignition and ground. A PCM can have several B plus feeds that are constant, ignition switched feeds that are only present while the key is on, and then even potentially some sort of wake up signal over a bus as well. And so what I'm getting at here is a module that is fed power on a single circuit that is not supposed to have power on can cause some very strange things to happen. Now, I say this with a little bit of proof because we've seen that. We actually saw this just recently on an anti-theft module for older Tahoe, where somebody had wired in the wires up through the column and they switched the B plus in the ignition wake up circuit to the anti-theft module. And this really screwed this thing up. We could not learn a key to this thing to save our lives. And that's actually why we got called, as a locksmith tried to do a key. And it was functioning. It was actually working before they tried to do the key. And then it went into a learn mode and would not accept keys at all. Well, it turns out when we swapped these two wires back to where they were supposed to be, right, constant power where it's supposed to be and switch power where it's supposed to be, then it worked fine. Learned the key and it was good. And I've seen this periodically where you can have power on a circuit when it is not supposed to be there, when the module's not expecting it to be there, right? When we're supposed to be in an off state, but we still have power there, that can cause the module to do some very strange things. And maybe some unpredictable things in some cases, which I think is what was going on here. Again, I don't have 100% proof, but what I do know is this was over a month ago, is that that car is fixed, right? So maybe I can't articulate exactly why having power on this ignition wake up screwed up this module to where it was coding for fuel pressure when there really wasn't a fuel pressure problem, and it wasn't pulsing the ignition coils when it had proper cam and crank. But again, whatever the reason was, we did fix it. Now, the piece of information that made me more confident to say this to the shop, like, hey, this is most likely going to fix your problem, is them getting the information from the customer saying that these things occurred at the same time. That's a big piece of information. So you got to question either, the person you're working with as far as a shop or the end user, the driver of the vehicle. These little details of information can really be crucial. Because if we didn't know that, we'd just kind of be like, well, I fixed your draw, but I'm not really sure about your no start thing. Good luck. I felt pretty good about saying like, hey, try this for a few days, but if it doesn't act up, I think this fixed both problems with one issue. Now, the other thing was there was a couple other wires in that harness there that were bare. I didn't take the time, to be totally honest, I didn't take the time to figure out what circuits those were, but I told them like, hey, fix all of those wires. There is a small potential that maybe one of the other ones interacted with the PCM somehow that was causing that issue on top of the draw. That's a possibility too. So I don't want to rule that out. But I did want to share this as far as my mindset working through this, how we got to the solution. Again, it's not always a perfectly clear step-by-step path to get there. Sometimes it's a little clunky, but we can still work through it. We can still get to the solution. So anyways, I hope you found that interesting and useful. If you got any information to add to it, maybe it's something you saw before, I'll post a picture of the damaged wiring in the Facebook group. Please share, though. Always appreciate information that people are nice enough to share with me after the fact, because the collective information that we all have is way more than any one of us. And I always learn something when I talk to people. So don't hesitate to send that in. But that's all I got for you today. Thank you for listening. Let's get out there, start fixing the world one car at a time.